Snow fell in patient sheets outside Denver International, turning the runway lights into soft halos. Almost peaceful, almost forgiving. Archer told himself the delay was just weather, just another hold between departures, until he looked up from his coffee and saw his wife's hand, Astrid's hand, resting where it shouldn't have been, on the leg of the one person he would have sworn was untouchable. The lounge stayed quiet, expensive, polite, but something in the air turned sharp, like metal on teeth. It felt less like a mistake and more like a message. If you've ever sensed a secret before it had a name, stay with me. Some betrayals don't begin in bedrooms. They begin in waiting rooms. Source: the lounge had the kind of quiet money bought. Soft leather, muted news on a wall-mounted screen. A bartender who moved like he had been trained not to exist. Outside the windows, Denver International disappeared into a white storm, the runway lights blinking through the snowfall like distant warnings. Archer sat with his boarding pass face down, as if hiding the destination could change it. Long-haul flights were supposed to feel familiar by now. The weight of a carry-on, the thin taste of airport coffee, the mild ache behind his eyes from living in pressurized air. But tonight the delay made time stretch wrong. The snowstorm didn't just ground planes. It pinned people to their lives. He had convinced Astrid to come with him to the airport. A rare thing. She had insisted she couldn't. Dockets, meetings, you know how it is. And then, 2 hours before his check-in, she'd changed her mind with no explanation, showing up at their place in a camel coat, lips the color of discipline, eyes too clear. Now she wasn't sitting across from him. Archer noticed the absence the way he noticed turbulence, before his brain gave it permission. His gaze moved, slow and reflexive, scanning over business travelers and couples who weren't talking anymore, over a man asleep with his mouth open, over a woman typing like she was trying to outrun something. Then he saw Astrid. She stood near the far window where the light was colder, where the snow made the glass look like frosted film. Her posture was perfect, courtroom perfect, shoulders set like a closing argument. At first, Archer's relief came in a wave so strong it almost embarrassed him. And then he saw who she was with. Oddly, Archer's best friend wore a charcoal sweater and her hair pulled back the way she did at the hospital when she didn't want it touched. Her face was composed in that familiar, therapist calm, an expression Archer had trusted through panic attacks, through the night his father died, through the first year of marriage when his schedule chewed their intimacy into scraps. Ottilie leaned in slightly, just enough that the distance between her and Astrid stopped being casual. Astrid's hand rested on Ottilie's thigh. Not a brush. Not an accidental graze. A placement. A claim. Archer didn't move. He felt his body turn to protocol. Freeze and observe. It was what he did in the cockpit when alarms rang. Identify, assess, don't panic. The problem was that this wasn't an engine warning. This was his life. Ottilie said something Archer couldn't hear. Astrid smiled, small and sharp, and for a second Archer recognized that smile from somewhere else. Not from home, not from weekends, but from televised press conferences where she stood behind the seal of the state and spoke about guilt like it was gravity. A laugh escaped Astrid, soundless from this distance, and her fingers tightened briefly as if to punctuate a point. Ottilie's gaze dropped to the hand, then lifted. Her eyes tracked across the lounge, straight to Archer. The moment held. Not long, just long enough. Ottilie didn't flinch. She didn't look guilty. She looked prepared, like she had expected him to be sitting exactly there, in exactly that chair, with exactly that stunned stillness. Archer's throat went dry. He wanted to stand, to cross the lounge in 3 strides, to speak her name, either of them, and force the scene to become real. But some part of him didn't want the reality. He wanted the possibility that he had misread the angle, that it was comfort, not intimacy. Astrid turned her head slightly, following Ottilie's line of sight, and their eyes met Archer's like a verdict being delivered without sound. Astrid didn't look away. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. Her thumb moved with practiced ease. A second later, Archer's own phone vibrated on the table beside his coffee. A single text from Astrid. "We need to talk." "Not here." "Not yet." Archer stared at the message until the letters blurred. When he looked up again, Astrid's hand was no longer on Audely's thigh. It was in Audely's hand. And Archer realized, with a cold clarity that felt nothing like jealousy and everything like fear, that whatever this was, affair, betrayal, revenge, it had been arranged with the same care Astrid brought to a case, with the same calm Audely brought to pain. The snow kept falling, erasing tracks outside. Inside, Archer finally inhaled, shallow and sharp, as if he had forgotten how. He typed back without knowing what he was agreeing to. When? The three dots appeared, then vanished. Astrid's reply arrived like a door closing. Soon. The announcement came again, polite, apologetic, about the snowstorm and the indefinite delay. The lounge absorbed it the way it absorbed everything. Quietly, expensively, like bad news was just another amenity. Archer stood, but he did not stride. He walked as if the distance between tables were measured in inches of ice. Every step felt watched, even before he knew he was being watched. Astrid had already started moving, as if she had anticipated his approach and timed her exit to avoid the obvious scene. She angled toward the corridor that led to restrooms and quieter gates, liminal airport space, neither public nor private. Audely followed half a pace behind, not like a lover, not like a friend, like a witness. Archer caught up near a glass wall where the storm made the outside world look erased. Astrid. She stopped. She turned with a composed slowness that made Archer's skin prickle. In the courtroom, he had seen her like this on local news clips. Chin lifted, eyes steady, a face trained to look truthful even when the truth was complicated. What you saw, Astrid said, was not what you think. The words landed with a chill familiarity. Not reassurance. Not apology. A preemptive objection. Archer felt his jaw tighten. He heard, absurdly, the quiet clink of a glass behind the bar. He smelled citrus from someone's cologne. The world kept being ordinary, and that ordinariness made him furious. Audely's gaze stayed on him, soft and assessing, the way she used to look at him in the hospital cafeteria after his father's funeral, when he had run out of tears and started living on caffeine and denial. A flash of that memory rose uninvited. Archer, younger, shoulders slumped in a plastic chair, Audely sliding a paper cup toward him as if it were something sacred. You don't have to be fine, she had said then. You just have to be honest about what hurts. Now, in the airport corridor, she looked like she had never said those words. Astrid, Archer repeated, slower. Why was your hand on her? Astrid's expression did not crack. She did not glance at Audely. Because you've been gone, she said, and her voice stayed even, measured, prosecutorial. And because you always assume the simplest narrative is the correct one. Narrative, Archer echoed. The words sounded wrong coming from her mouth, like she was narrating him instead of speaking to him. Audely stepped closer, still not too close. Archer, she began, and there was a careful gentleness in her tone that might have been kindness if it hadn't arrived so perfectly on cue. This isn't the place. You're flooded right now. Your nervous system, don't. Archer snapped, and the sharpness surprised even him. Don't therapize me. Audely flinched. Not dramatically, just enough to show she had felt it. Astrid lifted her phone slightly, as if holding a badge. We talk when I say we talk, she said, then softened the edges with a practiced calm. In private, not in a hallway where anyone can record you losing control. Archer's pulse thudded. The idea that she was already managing how it would look, that she was thinking in angles and optics, made the air feel thin. I'm not the one holding hands with my husband's best friend, he said. Astrid's gaze flicked over his shoulder, a brief scan of passing travelers. She lowered her voice. I need you to get on your flight when it clears. I need you to be exactly where your itinerary says you are. Archer stared at her. The sentence did not sound like marriage. It sounded like instruction. Why? He asked, and there it was, his first real question, the one that reached under the jealousy and grabbed something colder. Astrid hesitated. It was small, a pause shorter than a heartbeat. But Archer saw it because he had spent years reading wind shifts by tiny changes in sound. Audely's phone vibrated in her pocket. She instinctively touched the pocket, then stopped herself, as if remembering she was being watched. Archer's eyes dropped anyway. The rectangular outline was visible beneath the sweater's fabric. Adelie took a breath. I should go, she said too quickly. Astrid didn't move. Stay. Adelie's mouth tightened, and for the first time her composure looked strained, not by Archer's anger, but by Astrid's command. Archer reached forward before he fully decided to. Not grabbing, not attacking, just an open hand, a pilot's steady hand, aimed at Adelie's pocket. Let me see it, he said. Adelie stepped back. No. Astrid's eyes sharpened. Archer. But Archer was already past the warning. He wasn't thinking about dignity anymore. He was thinking about the way Adelie had looked at him across the lounge, prepared. He was thinking about Astrid's earlier text. Not yet. He hooked 2 fingers under the edge of Adelie's phone as it shifted in her pocket from the movement. The device slid out just enough for the screen to wake. A message preview flashed across it. One line, bright and merciless. Delete everything. He's closer than we thought. Archer froze with the phone half revealed, the words burning into him like runway lights through snow. He looked up at Adelie first. Her face had gone pale. Then he looked at Astrid. And Astrid, finally, looked afraid, not of being caught, but of what Archer might understand next. Archer kept his fingers on the edge of Adelie's phone like it was the only solid thing in the corridor. The message preview still glowed, bright against the muted airport light. Delete everything. He's closer than we thought. For a second, no one spoke. Even the storm felt quieter, as if the snow outside had leaned in to listen. Adelie's breath hitched. Astrid's face tightened, not into anger, not into apology, but into calculation. Archer had seen that expression before, on nights when Astrid came home late and removed her heels as if she were taking off a mask. It was the look she wore when the facts were bad but manageable, if she controlled the order they surfaced. Astrid, Archer said, and the steadiness in his voice startled him. What is this? Adelie reached for the phone with a careful slowness, palms open, as if Archer were holding something fragile instead of incriminating. Give it back, she said. Please. Not until you explain. Adelie's eyes shone with something that resembled shame and didn't. It was too clean, too contained. Astrid stepped forward and lowered her voice to a near whisper. You're making this worse. That's funny, Archer said, because I wasn't the one deleting everything. The word everything sat between them like a fourth person. A flash of memory cut through him, so vivid it carried a smell with it, antiseptic and burnt coffee. Years ago, Archer had been 23 and angry at the world for reasons he couldn't name. He'd crashed his car on a wet curve outside a small Colorado town during a visit home. Nothing dramatic, just a moment of careless speed, a moment that could have cost him his career before it started. Adelie had been the one on call at the clinic, hair pulled back, eyes steady, hands warm on his bruised knuckles as she checked him for concussion. You can lie to everyone, she had said then, quiet and firm, but your body won't cooperate. He had laughed, defensive. I'm fine. Adelie had leaned closer like she was sharing a secret. Pilots don't get to be fine. They get to be honest. He had trusted her after that. Trusted her with the parts of himself he couldn't bring into a cockpit or a relationship. The fear of failing. The fear of coming home to an empty house. The fear of being loved only when he was useful. And she had never once used his fear against him. Until now. Archer blinked, and the corridor returned. The storm, the distant announcements, the thin hum of ventilation. Adelie stood in front of him, older, still composed, but with her phone half caught between his fingers like evidence. Astrid's hand touched Archer's forearm, light as a warning. Let it go, she said. He looked at her hand, then at her face. You told me you needed me to be exactly where my itinerary said I was. Astrid didn't answer fast enough. Adelie's gaze flicked to Astrid, then away. It was a reflex, tiny, betraying. Archer felt the hair rise at the back of his neck. You're tracking me, Archer said, the words tasting unreal. Or, you're trying to make sure someone else can. Astrid exhaled through her nose, a controlled release. You're spiraling. I'm noticing, Archer corrected. That's different. Adelie swallowed. Archer, whatever you think this is, I think you were deleting something, he cut in. And I think it involved me. Adelie's voice softened, dangerously familiar. You don't know what you're stepping into. There it was. Not denial. Not confession. A warning. Astrid's phone buzzed. She glanced down, and Archer caught a name on the screen before she tilted it away. Brian. The angle of her wrist was practiced, like she'd learned to hide the same way she'd learned to persuade. Archer felt something settle inside him, heavy and cold. The betrayal wasn't only physical. It was procedural. Astrid looked up, and for the first time her composure thinned at the edges. "We can talk," she said. "Tonight. At the Meridian. Not here." Audley's eyes widened slightly, surprise, quick as a blink. Archer noticed it because he was watching for cracks now. Astrid continued, softer. "Just us. No scene. No recordings. You want truth? Then stop forcing it out in public." Archer stared at them. Two women who had once felt like separate pillars of his life, now standing together like a wall. He let Audley take the phone back. Not because he believed them. Because he understood, finally, what they were afraid of. Not his anger, but his evidence. As Audley slid the phone into her pocket, Archer felt his own phone vibrate. A new email alert from the airline app appeared on his screen. It showed a schedule adjustment, small, almost invisible to anyone who wasn't trained to read time like a threat. His departure had been moved. His route had changed. Archer looked up at Astrid. She was already watching his screen, and the way she watched it told him everything he needed to know. The storm outside wasn't the reason he'd been delayed. It was just convenient cover. "You still want me on that flight?" Archer said. Astrid's voice came out steady again. "Yes." "Why?" he asked, even though he felt the answer forming like bruises. Astrid held his gaze. "Because if you don't go," she said carefully, "someone will decide you didn't just witness something tonight." Archer's stomach turned. "And what will they decide I did?" he asked. Astrid didn't blink. Audley did. Archer nodded once, slow, like accepting a clearance he didn't understand. "Fine," he said. "I'll go." He turned away first, so they wouldn't see what it cost him to sound calm. Behind him, the lounge lights hummed. The snow kept falling. And Archer walked back toward the gate with the sick certainty that his marriage had stopped being a relationship. It had become a timeline. Archer waited until Astrid and Audley disappeared back into the lounge before he moved again. He didn't follow them. He didn't watch them from across the room like a man begging for a clearer view of his own humiliation. He walked the opposite direction, toward the quieter end of the concourse where the lights dimmed and the shops closed early, as if even commerce respected the storm. He called Rachel Green because she was the kind of person who didn't ask permission before telling the truth. Rachel answered on the second ring, voice low and brisk. "You're grounded in Denver, right?" The fact that she knew made his chest tighten. "How?" "Airport group chat," she said. "Pilots talk. Flight attendants talk. And you text like someone who's about to do something stupid." Archer stopped near a row of empty charging stations. His reflection ghosted in the dark screen of a turned-off advertisement. A man in a wool coat with eyes too open. "I saw Astrid," he said. The words felt scraped raw. "With Audley." There was a pause, not dramatic, just a quiet recalibration on the other end of the line. "Where are you?" Rachel asked. "The concourse. Past the lounge." "Stay there," she said. "I'm in the terminal. Don't ask." Archer almost laughed. Rachel was already moving. While he waited, the storm outside pressed itself against the glass in soft, endless sheets. His phone kept lighting up with airline updates, each one a small shove toward a route he no longer trusted. He opened the latest schedule change again and again, as if repetition could turn it into a misunderstanding. A memory cut in, one of the early nights after he married Astrid. They had been in their kitchen, Denver sunlight fading to amber through the blinds. Astrid stood barefoot, hair damp from a shower, and she'd asked him to pull up his monthly flight schedule. She'd said it was practical, so she could plan dinners, weekends, something resembling a life. Archer had felt absurdly loved by her attention to logistics. Now, in the terminal, he saw that same attention like a blade. Routes weren't romance. Routes were proof. Routes were alibis. Routes were a way to place someone precisely where the record said they belonged. Rachel found him 10 minutes later, cheeks flushed from the cold and the speed. She wore a long coat over office clothes and carried a paper cup of coffee like a weapon. She took one look at his face and didn't bother with softness. "Okay," she said. "Tell me exactly what happened." He told her about the lounge window, the hand on the thigh, the way Audley had looked prepared. He told her about the message preview on Audley's phone, "Delete everything. He's closer than we thought," and the way Astrid had watched Archer screen when the airline changed his route. When he finished, Rachel's mouth had gone thin with concentration. "That doesn't sound like a messy affair," she said. "That sounds like damage control." Archer stared at her. "From what?" Rachel hesitated. She turned her coffee in her hands, as if warming them bought time. "Astrid's office has been loud lately," she said carefully. "Not publicly. Quiet loud. People walking in pairs. Phones face down. And there's a case she's on, big enough that everyone around her is scared of being in the frame." Archer's stomach tightened. "What case?" Rachel shook her head. "I don't have the name. I'm not in her world. But I have a friend who is." She looked past Archer toward the lounge, as if expecting Astrid to appear in the corridor like a summoned ghost. "A prosecutor doesn't panic over a marriage problem, Archer. They panic over exposure." He swallowed. Exposure of what? Rachel reached into her bag and pulled out her own phone. She didn't hand it to him. She held it so he could see the screen without touching it, like a document across a desk. "It's not a headline," she said. "It won't be. It's internal, but there's talk of a sealed inquiry." Archer's pulse slowed in a way that felt unnatural, like his body was bracing for impact. "An inquiry into Astrid?" "Not officially." Rachel's eyes held his. "Into procedural irregularities. Evidence chain stuff. The kind of thing that ruins careers quietly, unless it turns criminal." Archer heard himself ask, "Where do I come in?" Rachel's thumb scrolled once. She showed him a line of text, vague, bureaucratic, but unmistakably sharp. Subject referenced. A. Hale, travel schedule verification pending. His name looked wrong in that context, like a name printed on the wrong boarding pass. Archer's voice came out thin. That's me." Rachel nodded once. "Indirectly," she said, "which means someone has already decided you're useful, either as a witness they can control or as a timeline they can write around." Archer's hands went cold. He pictured Astrid's steady eyes and Audley's calm voice and realized the most terrifying part wasn't that they had betrayed him. It was that they had drafted him. Rachel lowered her phone. "You said Astrid told you to meet at the Meridian tonight?" Archer nodded. Rachel leaned closer, her voice dropping. "Then you don't go in there like a husband," she said. "You go in there like a man who understands he's being placed." Archer looked toward the lounge, toward the storm, toward the gate numbers that suddenly felt like coordinates on a map he hadn't agreed to follow. "What do I do?" he asked. Rachel didn't answer immediately. She studied him the way Audley used to, but without the performance. "You get your own timeline," she said finally, before they finished deleting theirs. Archer's phone vibrated again, this time a message from Astrid. "We're leaving. Meridian. Come alone." Archer stared at the words until they stopped being letters and became a door. He looked up at Rachel. "They think I'm going to walk in there blind," he said. Rachel's gaze didn't waver. "Then don't." He slipped his phone into his pocket, feeling the weight of it like a new kind of instrument, one that could record, timestamp, betray. Outside, snow kept falling with the patience of something that knew it would win. The Meridian rose out of the snow-lit night like a statement piece, glass, steel, and warm interior lights that made the storm outside look ornamental. It was the kind of building people chose when they wanted privacy without isolation, prestige without explanation. Archer arrived early and parked across the street, keeping the engine off so the silence could sharpen his hearing. He sat with his phone in his hand, the screen dimmed, his breath fogging the windshield in small, controlled bursts. Rachel had offered to come, had offered 10 different versions of support, but Astrid's text, "Come alone," had been its own kind of leash. Archer understood the point of it now. Alone meant uncorroborated. Alone meant malleable. He did what pilots did before bad weather. He ran checks. He turned off Face ID. He enabled screen recording. He opened his notes app and typed the time with a steadiness that felt borrowed, 11:12 p.m. Meridian lobby visible. Across the street, the building's revolving door turned slowly, swallowing a couple in matching parkas. The lobby was bright enough that Archer could see reflections layered over reality. People moving inside, ghosted by the glass. He watched anyway, because watching was the only thing that had not betrayed him yet. At 11:19, Audley appeared at the edge of the frame, stepping out of a rideshare. She carried a structured leather tote that looked too heavy for a late-night talk. Her hair was pulled back. Her posture was professional. If Archer hadn't known her, he would have assumed she was there for work. She paused outside the entrance as if checking the weather. Her hand drifted to her pocket, thumb moving with a familiar urgency, texting, deleting, sending. Then she lifted her gaze, not toward the street in general, but toward a specific point, the corner where Archer's car sat in shadow. Archer felt the small, sick lurch of recognition. She didn't see him. She checked for him. Audley entered the lobby. A minute later, a man in a dark beanie and a long coat crossed the street at an angle that felt intentional. He didn't hurry. He didn't look lost. He stopped near the Meridian side entrance and pretended to adjust his scarf while his phone remained raised at chest level, screen facing outward as if it were nothing. Archer's fingers tightened around his own phone. He zoomed in and caught the posture, the slight tilt of the device, the way the man's shoulders stayed too still. It wasn't casual scrolling. It was framing. Inside the lobby, Audley moved toward the concierge desk and leaned in. The concierge, an older man with silver hair, didn't smile. He slid something across the counter, a single keycard sleeve. Audley's hand covered it, as if it might fly away. Archer took a screenshot. At 11:27, Astrid arrived. She came in her own car, because Astrid never left variables unknown if she could avoid it. She stepped from the driver's seat with a courthouse calm, coat belted tight, hair perfect in a way that read less like vanity and more like armor. When she crossed the sidewalk, she didn't scan the street for danger. She scanned it for witnesses. Her eyes passed over the beanie man without lingering, as if he were furniture. Archer's stomach went hollow. That was the most damning detail yet. Astrid didn't register him as a stranger. Astrid entered the lobby and stopped near the elevators, just inside the bright spill of the overhead lights. She didn't approach Audley right away. She checked her phone. Then she angled her body slightly, so anyone filming from outside would have a clean line. Her face, her posture, the suggestion of anticipation. A scene needed a heroine. Or a villain. Archer couldn't tell which role she thought she was playing. Audley appeared from the hall near the concierge. When she reached Astrid, she didn't kiss her. She didn't touch her. She said something low, and Astrid's lips curved into a small, deliberate smile. Exactly the kind of expression that photographed well. Then Astrid's hand rose and rested on Audley's arm in a way that looked intimate at a distance and plausible up close. Archer realized, with a cold clarity, that this wasn't about what they felt. It was about what could be proven. His phone buzzed, another airline update. A new push notification that tried to drag him back into the old world of gates and departures. He ignored it. Across the street, the beanie man shifted, phone still lifted. He took a step, then another, creating motion, creating a sequence. Archer finally opened his car door. The cold hit him like punishment. He started walking toward the Meridian, not fast, not slow, just controlled, as if speed might turn him into the story they wanted. His shoes bit into slush. The revolving door spun as he approached, reflecting his face back at him in fragments. Inside, warmth wrapped around him. Astrid looked up. For a fraction of a second, her eyes flickered, not with guilt, but with irritation, like a plan disrupted. Audley's face went pale in a way that could not be staged. Archer stopped a few feet away, close enough to smell Astrid's perfume. Clean, expensive, familiar, and close enough to see Audley's throat move as she swallowed. "You told me to come alone," Archer said quietly. Astrid's voice stayed even. "You did." He held up his phone, screen facing them, showing the time-stamped screenshot of the keycard sleeve sliding across the concierge desk. "What room?" Archer asked. Audley's hand tightened around her tote strap as if it were the last thing keeping her upright. Astrid didn't answer. And Archer understood the next truth like a door opening in his chest. If they had a room, they had a plan for what would happen in it, what would be said, what would be recorded, what would be erased. He lowered the phone slowly, meeting Astrid's eyes without blinking. "Talk," he said, "or I start asking the building questions you can't seal." The Meridian lobby smelled like money trying to be neutral, citrus in the air vents, polished stone, a floral arrangement that looked freshly replaced for the sake of appearances. Archer stood with his shoulders squared, phone heavy in his palm, while Astrid and Ottilie formed a quiet line in front of him. Wife, best friend, wall. Astrid spoke first, voice low, controlled. "You're not going to accuse us in the lobby." "I'm not accusing," Archer said. "I'm confirming." Ottilie's eyes flicked toward the glass doors, to the street beyond where snow kept falling and the beanie man could still be out there, filming angles like prayer. She looked back at Archer as if seeing him hurt her, too, if hurt was the right word for what lived behind her composure. Astrid turned slightly, so the concierge couldn't read her lips. "We go upstairs," she said. "We talk, and you leave with your dignity intact." Archer almost laughed. Dignity, like it was something she could grant. "What room?" he asked again. Astrid held his gaze a beat too long, as if measuring what he would do with the answer. Then she reached into her coat pocket and produced a keycard sleeve, plain, white, no number visible from a distance. She slid it into Archer's hand, not like a gift, but like a file. "Penthouse level," she said. "Conference suite, not a bedroom. Don't do that thing where you turn this into what it already is." Archer's voice stayed quiet, but something in it sharpened the air. Ottilie flinched as if he'd raised his hand. They rode the elevator in silence. The lights inside were too bright, too honest. Archer watched the digital numbers climb while his reflection hovered in the mirrored wall, a man trying to look like he wasn't unraveling. Astrid stood perfectly still, chin lifted. Ottilie's fingers worried the strap of her tote, knuckles whitening and unwhitening in small cycles. On the ride up, Archer remembered a different elevator. Years ago, hospital floors, the smell of antiseptic. Ottilie beside him explaining a grief group she thought might help. She had spoken about confidentiality with reverence back then, like it was a sanctuary people didn't realize they needed until it was gone. The doors opened onto a quiet corridor with thick carpet that swallowed footsteps. Astrid walked ahead with purpose, Ottilie trailing half a step behind her again. Witness, not lover, not friend. In the conference suite, the city lights bled through tall windows, blurred by the storm. A long table sat under recessed lighting. A bottle of water waited in the center, as if the room expected negotiations. Astrid shut the door. The latch clicked softly. "Talk," Archer said, and placed his phone on the table face up. Not recording openly, not hidden, just present, an object that changed how people lied. Astrid's gaze dropped to it, a brief tightening at her mouth. "You think you're being smart." "I think I'm being documented," Archer replied. Ottilie set her tote on a chair. Her hands hovered over the zipper, uncertain. "Archer," she began, and for the first time her voice sounded tired, not careful. "You don't understand the way this happened." Astrid snapped her eyes toward Ottilie. "Stop." The word landed too hard for a marriage conversation. Archer watched Ottilie's face at the command, watched the reflex in her throat, the way she swallowed obedience before she could taste it. Something in him went cold and clear. "She tells you when to speak," Archer said to Ottilie. "That's what this is." Ottilie's eyes filled, but the tears did not fall. "It's not like that." "Then explain the message," Archer said. "Delete everything." Ottilie's hands trembled as she reached into her tote. She pulled out a thin manila folder, creased, used, handled too often for something that should have stayed locked away. Astrid's voice cut through. "Put that back." Ottilie didn't. She opened the folder with a slowness that felt like stepping off a ledge. Inside were printed pages, clinical formatting, dates, brief summaries, bullet points that reduced a human life to patterns. Archer's stomach turned as he recognized phrases he had spoken in rooms that were supposed to be safe. Sleep disruption during layovers, one line read. Fear of being replaceable. Alcohol intake increased after father's death anniversary. Archer stared. The room seemed to tilt, not violently, but enough to make his balance uncertain. That's mine, he said. The words came out hoarse. Audley nodded once, barely. Your sessions, she whispered. Archer's eyes lifted to Astrid. You had access to this? Astrid's composure didn't break, but something in her eyes hardened, as if softness had become too risky. I didn't have access, she said. I obtained what I needed. From her, Archer said, and looked back at Audley. From my best friend. Audley shook her head quickly, panic bleeding through her training. I didn't give them to her. I swear. I kept notes, minimal notes, because that's what you do. But someone got into the system. Someone requested extracts. They said it was lawful. They said it was connected to what? Archer demanded. Audley's gaze flicked to Astrid again, pleading and afraid. To an inquiry, she said. Sealed. Procedural. They wanted patterns. Travel schedules. Triggers. The things that make you predictable. Archer felt his hands curl into fists at his sides, nails biting skin. Who is that? Astrid stepped forward and placed her palm flat on the folder, covering Archer's life with one decisive gesture. Enough, she said. You're going to listen to me now. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not warm. I did what I had to do, Astrid continued, each word shaped like it could survive cross-examination. And you are going to do what I need you to do next. Or everything you've ever confessed in a safe room becomes a weapon in someone else's hands. Archer stared at her, the woman he'd married, and realized the affair was almost a distraction compared to this. The quiet theft of his private self turned into leverage. He looked at Audley, her face wrecked with guilt that finally looked real. Then he looked back at Astrid. What did you trade me for? Archer asked softly. Astrid didn't answer, but the silence was its own confession, and it filled the suite like the storm pressing against the glass. The conference suite held its quiet like a sealed courtroom. Snowlight and city glow pressed against the windows, turning the glass into a pale mirror where three silhouettes stood too far apart to call themselves a unit. Astrid kept her palm on the folder as if she could mute what it contained. Audley remained by the chair with her tote, shoulders tight, eyes wet but refusing to spill. Archer stood at the edge of the long table, feeling the room's warmth fail to reach his hands. He could have shouted. He could have demanded the word that would make it simple, affair, and burned everything down with it. But the pages in the folder had already shown him what they were truly dealing in. Not lust, not romance. Data, vulnerability, predictability. Astrid broke the silence the way she would begin a closing statement, softly, with the confidence of someone who believed the end was already decided. You keep asking what I traded you for, she said. The answer is time. Archer stared at her. Time for what? Astrid exhaled, and for a moment her composure thinned like ice under pressure. For control, she admitted. For a chance to finish what I started before someone decided I was disposable. Audley's eyes lifted sharply. Astrid. Astrid cut her off with a look, not cruel but absolute. Don't. That single exchange told Archer more than any confession could. Audley wasn't an equal player. She was a component, useful, compromised, and frightened. Archer's voice stayed low. Was it real, he asked. You and her. Astrid's gaze didn't waver. What you saw was real enough to photograph, she said, and something like disgust flickered across her mouth. Whether at herself or at him, Archer couldn't tell. That was the point. The words hit Archer with a dull force. Real enough to photograph. The kind of truth that didn't have to be true to ruin you. Audley finally stepped forward, voice shaking. It wasn't supposed to go this far, she said. You were never supposed to see it. Archer turned to her, and the grief on his face was almost worse than anger. Then why did you look at me? He asked quietly. At the airport. Like you were waiting. Audley's chin trembled. Because I knew you would, she whispered. Because I knew you always noticed the wrong thing before you noticed the right one. Astrid's eyes flashed. Stop talking. But Audley didn't stop this time. Her voice grew steadier, as if the guilt finally outweighed the fear. They wanted him close, she said, looking at Archer now. They wanted him reactive. They wanted a narrative. Archer's pulse slowed, that pilot's calm settling over terror. Who is they? He asked again. Astrid tapped the folder with her fingertips. 1, 2. Like punctuation. People you don't want to meet, she said. People who can turn a sealed inquiry into a criminal referral with one phone call. And you're protecting me from them? Archer asked, and the bitterness in his tone tasted like metal. Astrid didn't pretend. I'm protecting myself, she said. Then, after a beat, softer. And I'm trying to keep you from being collateral. The honesty, small, brutal, landed harder than any apology. Archer felt his wedding ring suddenly too tight, like it had been forged from obligation instead of love. Astrid slid the folder toward him, just an inch. Read the dates, she said. Read the requests. You'll see it started before the airport. Before tonight. Someone needed your schedule verified, officially, and they needed a reason for you to look unstable if you pushed back. Archer's eyes dropped to the page margins, to the tidy timestamps, to the bureaucratic language that made his private life sound like a controlled substance. He saw his own layovers turned into locations, his fatigue turned into motive. When he looked up, Astrid's face had that courtroom calm again. Here's the deal, she said, and Archer almost laughed at the word, because of course it was a deal. You don't go public. You don't confront anyone outside this room. You keep flying your assigned route when it clears. You give me 48 hours. 48 hours for what? Archer asked, even as something in him already suspected the answer would be ugly. Astrid's voice lowered. To finish one last thing, she said. To retrieve what they're actually after. And to bury what they're using against you. Ottilie whispered. Astrid, you can't. Astrid's eyes sharpened. I can. Archer felt the edge of the trap. If he refused, he became the angry husband in a lobby, the unstable pilot with documented sleep disruption, the man who lashed out when betrayed. If he agreed, he became a pawn who walked where she placed him. He pictured the beanie man outside the Meridian, the angled phone, the staged hand on an arm, the way Astrid had scanned for witnesses, not safety. He understood then that the scandal was already prepared. It didn't require his permission. It only required his timing. Archer's throat tightened. If I give you 48 hours, he said, what do I get? Astrid held his gaze like a judge. The truth, she said. The real one, not the photograph. And if you're lying? Archer asked. For the first time, Astrid's voice carried something raw beneath the control. Then you destroy me, she said simply. And you let them destroy you with me. Silence returned, thick and final. Archer's hand moved to his ring without thinking. He didn't remove it. Not yet. But he felt it circle like a countdown. Fine, he said at last. 48 hours. Ottilie's shoulders sagged in relief that looked like shame. Astrid nodded once, as if a verdict had been entered. Good, she said. Then listen carefully, because once you leave this room, you can't afford to be seen as my husband. Archer stared at her. What am I then? Astrid's eyes flicked to the window, to the snow, to the city that didn't care. A man with an itinerary, she said, and a target on it. Archer left the Meridian with the conference suite's warmth still clinging to his clothes, like a scent he couldn't wash off. Astrid had stayed behind. She said she had calls to make, the way some people said they needed air. Ottilie had looked at Archer as if she wanted to say something human, something untrained, but her mouth had opened and closed on nothing. Outside, the storm had softened into steady snowfall, turning the streetlights into blurred lanterns. The city looked peaceful in a way that felt insulting. He walked 2 blocks before he realized his hands were shaking. Not from cold, from the effort of staying quiet. His phone vibrated again. Not an airline update this time. A notification from an app he barely used. Something Rachel had once insisted he install just to know what people are saying. He ignored it. Then another came. Then another, stacked like knocks on a door that would not stop. He stopped beneath an overhang outside a closed cafe, his breath turning white in the air. He unlocked the screen and saw Rachel's name calling. He answered on the first ring. I'm fine, he said automatically. Rachel didn't bother with the lie. It's live, she said. Archer's stomach tightened. What's live? Video, Rachel replied. Still images. A thread. It's moving fast. Archer stared at the falling snow as if it might translate. Of me? Yes, Rachel said, and he heard the anger she was trying to control. But not the version you lived. The version they framed. His thumb hovered. He opened the link she texted while she stayed on the line, like a hand on his shoulder. The first image was from the Denver lounge window, Astrid and Ottilie in that cold pane of light. The shot was angled so Ottilie's face looked vulnerable, soft. Astrid looked composed, almost sad. Archer, in the reflection, looked like a dark shape approaching, his posture blurred by glass, his expression unreadable. The caption did the rest. Pilot meltdown at ya? Witnesses say he lost it after seeing his wife with another woman. Under it, comments multiplied. Men laughing, women calling him dangerous, strangers diagnosing him in sentence fragments. Someone posted a second photo, cropped tighter, showing Archer's hand near Ottilie's pocket from the corridor moment, the exact instant he'd reached for the phone. It looked like aggression. It looked like a threat. It looked like the story they had promised him. Rachel's voice came through the speaker, low and urgent. Don't respond, she said. Not a single comment. Not a post. Not a message. If you show heat, they'll call it proof. Archer swallowed. The world narrowed to the glow of the screen and the steady, anonymous cruelty pouring in from people who had never known his name until someone decided they should. He scrolled once more and saw a username that made his blood chill, an account with no photo, no history, created days ago. It had posted the original thread with an eerily precise timeline. Lounge, corridor, Meridian lobby. As if someone had been collecting scenes all night. Archer heard Astrid's voice in his head. You can't afford to be seen as my husband. He understood now what that meant in practice. The internet didn't need his marriage license. It needed a villain. He saved everything. Screenshots, links, timestamps. He sent them to a folder Rachel had told him to use. One she said could be backed up automatically. Every movement felt procedural, like he was learning a new kind of flight checklist, not for engines, but for survival. Who leaked it? He asked, voice rough. Rachel exhaled. Not random, she said. This is too clean. Too fast. Someone wanted the narrative to land before the truth could. Archer stared at the snow collecting along the curb. He felt the old instinct surge, confront, expose, burn it down, then felt something colder rise over it. Restraint. If he reacted like a betrayed husband, they won. If he moved like a man building a case, maybe he had a chance. I'm going back to the airport, Archer said. What? Rachel snapped. Archer, my flight. He replied, and the words tasted like surrender and strategy at once. They wanted my itinerary. Fine. I'll be exactly where it says I am. He ended the call before Rachel could argue him out of the only control he had left. At Denver International, the terminal lights were harsh and indifferent. The business lounge was quieter now, thinned by the hour and the storm. Archer found an empty table near the gate monitors, set his phone down, and watched the departures list flicker with delays and new times, as if reality itself kept being revised. He slid his wedding ring off slowly. The skin beneath it looked paler, as if it had been protected from air for years. He placed the ring on the glass tabletop and listened to the small sound it made, soft, final, unmistakably real in a night full of edited images. He didn't look back toward the lounge. He didn't search for Astrid's face or Ottilie's shadow. He stood, picked up his carry-on, and walked toward the gate as the snowfall outside turned the runway lights into distant, trembling stars. He set the ring on the glass like a verdict and walked toward the gate that would never take him home again. Source Archer boarded the rescheduled flight like a man stepping back into a uniform he no longer trusted. The gate agent glanced at him twice, recognition tightening her smile. A man 2 rows behind whispered into his phone, and Archer felt the word pilot travel like static through the cabin. The internet had turned him into a caption, and captions followed people into real places now. He kept his face neutral anyway. Pilots were trained to look calm even when their hands wanted to shake. Source in first class, the lighting was warm and flattering, the kind that made everyone look less tired than they were. Archer slid into his seat and stared at the tray table in front of him, remembering the ring he had left on glass at the airport, how small it had sounded, how final. He did not feel free. He felt unmoored. He opened his laptop before takeoff, not to distract himself, but to build what Rachel had called his own timeline. He pulled up the airline schedule portal, then his archived rosters. A clean grid of dates and routes appeared, reassuring in its geometry. And then he saw it. A series of manual edits on his assignments, small changes made in the last 10 days. Not weather reroutes. Not staffing emergencies. Manual overrides. He clicked into the change history. Each edit showed an ID number, internal, anonymous by design, and a timestamp that landed like a bruise. The edits clustered around nights Archer had been asleep in his own bed, nights Astrid had come home late with that courthouse smell and a tight smile. The cabin door thudded closed. The sound felt like a lock. When the plane pushed back, Archer's inbox refreshed. A new message slid in from an address he did not recognize at first. A generic compliance mailbox, the kind no one looked at unless they were in trouble. Subject line: request for verification, travel schedule. Hail. His pulse slowed, strangely steady. He clicked. The body of the email was brief, polite, and clinical. It referenced a sealed inquiry, requested confirmation of Archer's presence on specific layovers, and attached a form labeled Chain of Custody Supplement, Flight Log Corroboration. Chain of Custody. Archer stared at the phrase until it stopped being language and became a threat. That term belonged to courtrooms, to evidence rooms, to things that decided guilt. He opened the attachment. The form contained a list of dates, locations, times, his badge number, and in the footer, a digital signature block that made his stomach drop. Astrid's name and office title appeared as the requesting authority. Except the signature didn't look like Astrid's careful style. It looked copied, flattened, like someone had traced it. He scrolled to the metadata panel and found the detail most people never knew to look for. The document had been generated on a hospital network. Mitchell Healthcare. Audley's World. Archer's mouth went dry. The affair was not simply humiliation. It was access. It was a bridge between systems that were never supposed to touch. Therapy records, travel logs, prosecutorial paperwork. Someone had used intimacy, real or staged, to make a pipeline. The aircraft lifted into gray sky, and the city fell away beneath cloud, the ground turning into something distant and harmless looking. Archer felt the opposite of safe. In a parallel world, on the ground, Astrid sat at her desk under fluorescent lights that did not flatter anyone. She held her phone with both hands, reading the same public thread Rachel had shown Archer, watching comments build like a mob assembling itself one brick at a time. She did not reply. She did not defend. She watched, and something in her face shifted, not into remorse, but into dread at how well the machine was working. Source: Audley, alone in her apartment, opened her laptop and found her hospital login locked. She tried again. Locked. She pressed her fingers to her forehead and breathed as if she could calm her pulse into obedience. Her phone lit with one message and no sender name. You held the line. Now hold it longer. Archer did not know that message existed, but he felt its presence anyway, like pressure in a sealed cabin. At cruising altitude, Archer forwarded the compliance email to Rachel and added 3 words in the subject line: do not reply. Then he created a new folder and saved everything into it. Screenshots from the Meridian, the schedule override history, the chain of custody form, the metadata that tied it to Mitchell Healthcare. He had proof now. Enough to clear his name if someone tried to paint him as unstable. Enough to destroy Astrid if the inquiry turned into prosecution. Enough to pull Audley's license and shred her life. The victory tasted like ash. His phone buzzed again, this time a text from Astrid. No apology. No tenderness. Only coordinates. They know you opened it. Don't land and go dark. Wait for my call. Archer stared at the message until the cabin lights seemed too bright. He realized, with a calm so cold it frightened him, that 48 hours had never been a request. It had been a window in which everyone would move their pieces. And he had just touched the one piece they were all guarding. He looked out the window at the endless gray and understood the simplest, cruelest truth. He was flying, but he was not the one in control. The Archer Hotel felt like an insult the moment Archer stepped inside. It was warm, polished, deliberately intimate. Low lighting, velvet chairs, a scent of cedar and citrus that clung to coats like an invitation. Above the front desk, a gold-lettered sign spelled his name in a font meant to look timeless, as if the building had been waiting for him. He imagined strangers reading it and thinking it was clever. He felt something closer to nausea. Archer moved through the lobby without rushing, keeping his shoulders loose, his face neutral. The online thread had taught him what anger looked like on camera. Rage made you believable in the wrong way. At the concierge desk, he asked for a conference suite by name, pre-booked under Astrid's office account, paid with a card he didn't recognize. The clerk handed him a keycard sleeve and smiled like nothing in the world had ever been ruined in a room upstairs. Before he turned away, Archer leaned in and lowered his voice. "If anything happens in that suite tonight," he said, "I'll need the security footage preserved." The clerk blinked, the smile faltering into professionalism. "Sir, just keep it," Archer repeated, calm as altitude. "All angles, all timestamps." He took the elevator alone. The mirrored walls returned his own reflection in fragments. A man split into panels. Pilot, husband, suspect. He touched his bare ring finger once, the skin still pale where the band had lived, and felt the absence like a phantom ache. The suite was set for negotiation. Long table, bottled water, a muted city view. Archer placed his phone on the table, plugged into a portable charger, screen recording already running in the background. He didn't point it at anyone like a weapon. He simply made it impossible for the room to pretend it had no memory. When Astrid arrived, she didn't knock. She entered like she owned the air. Ottilie followed, quieter, her tote held close to her ribs as if she could compress herself into something harmless. Her eyes found Archer immediately. She looked tired in a way he had never seen. Tired not from work, but from the strain of carrying two versions of herself at once. Astrid shut the door behind them. "You shouldn't have chosen this place," she said. Archer let his gaze drift to the gold logo on the water bottle label. "Archer, you chose it," he replied. "Or someone did, using your account." Astrid's jaw tightened. "You wanted witnesses. I wanted truth that survives editing," Archer said. Ottilie's breath caught. "Archer," he didn't turn to her yet. He kept his eyes on Astrid. "You told me 48 hours, he said. "Then you texted me like I was your asset." Astrid's voice stayed measured. "Because you opened the compliance email." "So you knew?" Archer said. Astrid didn't deny it. Denial was for people without documentation. Archer slid his laptop across the table and opened the change history on his flight assignments. Manual overrides clustered like fingerprints. Then he opened the chain of custody form and the metadata panel, the line that tied its generation to Mitchell Healthcare. He watched Astrid's eyes move as she read, watched the first crack in her composure appear. Not guilt, but the realization that Archer had learned where to look. Ottilie's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh God," she whispered, as if seeing the skeleton of the thing she'd helped build. "They used my network." Archer finally looked at her. "Who is they?" Ottilie's eyes filled. "I thought it was lawful," she said, voice trembling now, no longer trained. "I thought it was internal compliance. I thought," she swallowed hard. "Someone came to me with your name and your schedule. They said you were vulnerable. They said if you panicked, it would prove you were unstable. I didn't understand what they were doing until Denver." Astrid's head snapped toward Ottilie. "Stop." Ottilie flinched, but this time she didn't stop. "You knew," she said, and the accusation wasn't aimed at Archer. It was aimed at Astrid. "You knew they were building a case around him." Astrid's voice dropped. "I knew they were building a case around me." Silence spread in the suite, heavy and slow, like smoke. Archer felt his heartbeat settle into something frighteningly steady. "So the affair," he began, "was a shield," Astrid said flatly. "A decoy. A narrative that would land faster than the real story." "And what was the real story?" Archer asked. Astrid's eyes flicked toward the ceiling corner where a smoke detector sat, an unremarkable circle that suddenly felt like a camera. For the first time, she looked truly human, trapped, calculating, afraid of the next sentence. Then her phone buzzed. She didn't look at the screen, but Archer saw the name flash across it anyway. Brian. Astrid went still. Audley's face drained of color. Archer understood in one cold surge that the third person in their marriage wasn't Desire. It was a handler. He reached forward and flipped his own phone so they could see the recording indicator reflected faintly on the glass table. Answer it, Archer said quietly. Put it on speaker. Astrid stared at him like he'd just demanded she indict herself. Archer held her gaze, unwavering. If I'm collateral, he said, then tonight I become the witness. Astrid's thumb hovered over the screen. And for the first time, Archer saw her as she truly was beneath the polish. Not a villain, not a heroine. Just someone who had gambled with the wrong life. She tapped accept. Brian, she said, voice controlled. On speaker, a man's voice came through, calm, confident, already assuming the room belonged to him. Are you with him? Archer didn't blink. Astrid's eyes closed for half a second, like a prayer she didn't believe in. Yes, she answered. And Archer listened, motionless, as the truth finally stepped into the light with its own voice. The voice on speaker filled the suite with a calm that did not belong to ordinary people. Are you with him? Brian asked again, as if he were confirming a delivery. Astrid's posture stayed straight, but something in her eyes flickered, an involuntary reaction to being spoken to like an instrument. Yes, she repeated. There was a pause. Archer imagined Brian somewhere under fluorescent light, watching screens, watching timestamps, listening for the smallest tremor that proved control. Good, Brian said. Then you're going to do exactly what we discussed. No detours. Audley's hand hovered near her own phone, as if she wanted to call the police and couldn't decide whether the police belonged to her world or Brian's. Archer didn't speak yet. He kept still, letting the silence coax Brian into showing the shape of himself. He watched Astrid's throat move when she swallowed, watched the minute tightening in her jaw. Fear, not of Archer, but of what came next if she disobeyed. Astrid's voice remained measured. He has questions. Of course he does, Brian replied, almost amused. He's emotional. That's why he's useful. The words landed without heat. That was what made them obscene. Archer leaned forward, placing both palms on the table, not threatening, anchoring. Who are you? He asked quietly. Brian exhaled like a man indulging a child. Someone who cleans up messes your wife is smart enough to survive, if she follows directions. Audley made a sound, small, involuntary, and Archer felt the tremor of her guilt ripple through the room. Astrid stared at the table, at the folder of therapy notes, at the phone recording indicator reflected faintly in the glass. She looked like she was counting exits. Archer kept his voice low. You leaked the lounge footage. Brian didn't deny it. We corrected the story, he said. People believe what's framed cleanly. A pilot losing it is a complete narrative. A prosecutor manipulating evidence is not. Astrid's eyes closed for a fraction of a second. Archer's chest tightened. Evidence. There it was, said aloud, no longer implied. So that's what this was, Archer said. A cover. Brian's tone stayed mild. A buffer, he corrected. Something the public can chew while grown-ups handle the real problem. Audley finally found her voice. You used hospital systems, she said, shaking. You pulled clinical notes. Brian laughed once, softly. We requested documentation. Your network complied. If it makes you feel better, Dr. Audley, everyone believes therapists are saints. No one will blame you. Audley went pale, as if the room had lost oxygen. Archer turned his gaze to Astrid. Tell him, Archer said. Tell him you're done. Astrid's eyes snapped to Archer, sharp with warning. Her voice dropped to a whisper meant only for him. If I say that, he burns you first. Brian heard enough anyway. Astrid, he said, and the warmth vanished from his voice. Don't get sentimental. Archer watched something in Astrid fracture, not loudly, not dramatically. Like stress finally finding the weakest seam. What do you want from me? Archer asked Brian. Consistency, Brian replied. You land. You follow your updated itinerary. You do not go to the media. You do not go to internal affairs. You do not go to a lawyer with a hero complex. His voice hardened slightly. And your wife completes her task. Archer's stomach tightened. What task? Astrid didn't answer. Adelie's eyes brimmed again. Brian's tone returned to calm. There's a missing item in the chain, he said. Something that must be accounted for before an inquiry becomes a prosecution. Your wife is going to close that gap. Archer felt his pulse steady into something cold. By pinning it on me. A pause. Brian smiled through the speaker. Archer could hear it. If you want to call it that, Brian said. You were always going to be adjacent, Archer. You live in airports. You live in layovers. You live in places where things change hands. A reasonable person could believe you didn't notice. Astrid's voice finally wavered. Brian, don't, Brian said, and the single word was the clearest proof of power yet. You chose your career. You chose your conviction rate. You chose the kind of win that leaves stains. Finish it. Archer's hands tightened on the table edge until his knuckles whitened. He understood, suddenly, why Astrid had looked so composed in the lounge window. Composure photographed like innocence. Panic photographed like guilt. And Archer's panic had been the product all along. He reached down and slid his laptop a few inches toward Astrid and Adelie so the metadata panel stayed visible. He spoke to the room, but his words were meant for Brian. You said grown-ups handle the real problem, Archer said. So here's what a grown-up looks like. Astrid's eyes lifted, startled. Archer continued, voice quiet, precise. This call is being recorded. The schedule overrides are saved. The document metadata ties your chain of custody request to Mitchell Healthcare. The leak account's timestamps match your staging at the Meridian. He paused. If I go down, you don't just lose a pawn. You lose the illusion that this was clean. Silence on the speaker. For the first time, Brian didn't speak immediately. Adelie's breath broke into a small, trembling inhale, like she had been drowning and just found air. Astrid stared at Archer as if she were seeing him for the first time, not as a husband, not as a target, but as someone capable of turning procedure into a weapon. Brian's voice returned, softer now, edged with something new. You're bluffing. Archer looked directly at Astrid. Am I? He asked her. Astrid's lips parted. She didn't answer, but her eyes did. Fear and relief tangled together, because the trap was finally turning. Brian's voice sharpened. Astrid, in this. Now. Astrid's hands hovered over the folder, over Archer's name printed in clinical language. She looked at Adelie, whose face begged for mercy she didn't know how to earn. She looked back at Archer. And in that moment, Astrid made a choice that didn't look like love or betrayal. It looked like surrender. Her voice came out low. I can't finish it, she said. Brian's silence was absolute. Then he spoke, and his calm was gone. You just signed your own death warrant. The line went dead. The suite held a quiet, so profound Archer could hear the building's heat ticking behind the walls. Astrid stood frozen, eyes wide, as if she had finally stepped off a cliff she'd been walking toward for months. Adelie began to cry without sound. Archer picked up his phone and stopped the recording. His thumb hovered over send, over Rachel's name, over the folder that held every proof he'd collected. He looked at Astrid once, one last time, searching for the woman he'd married inside the prosecutor he was watching collapse. Then he hit send. Archer did not feel triumphant after he sent the file. He felt emptied, like a cabin after passengers deplaned, the air still warm with bodies that were no longer there. In the suite at the Archer Hotel, the silence became so complete it started to sound like something living. Astrid stood near the table as if her bones had forgotten what they were for. Adelie sat in a chair with her hands in her lap, crying without sound, the way people did when they had no right to ask for comfort. Outside the window, snow softened the city into blur. Inside, the world sharpened. Astrid's phone lit again. No name this time. Just a number. She did not answer. She stared at the screen as if it were a weapon pointed directly at her throat. When it stopped ringing, she exhaled with a shudder she tried to hide. Then she looked at Archer, not pleading, not bargaining, simply looking, as if she had finally run out of strategy and found herself holding only truth. I didn't start this to hurt you, she said. Archer's voice stayed quiet. But you kept going. Astrid nodded once. It was the smallest confession, but it carried the weight of every hour she had chosen procedure over intimacy. They came for my case first, she said, words measured but no longer polished. Then they came for my mistakes. Then they came for my fear of losing everything I built. Her eyes flicked to the folder, and when I realized they could turn it criminal, I tried to buy time. With me? Archer said. Astrid swallowed. With you. Ottilie made a broken sound. I thought I was helping, she whispered, voice raw. I thought I was protecting him from himself. And I handed them the map to his weakest places. Archer looked at her, and the grief on his face was quiet, not theatrical. You didn't just break a rule, he said. You broke the one thing I believed you were. Ottilie's shoulders collapsed inward, as if her body tried to make itself smaller than her guilt. Astrid took a slow step forward, stopping at a distance that used to be normal between husband and wife. Now it felt like a courtroom's aisle. What happens next, she said, is bigger than us. Archer almost smiled at the irony. She still reached for scale, for context, for the frame that made pain survivable. No, he said gently. What happens next is exactly us. It's just that the world gets to watch. His phone buzzed. Rachel's name. He answered, and her voice hit his ear like a lifeline made of steel. It's in motion, she said. Internal has acknowledged receipt. Someone at compliance called me back on a secure line. They're preserving the footage you flagged. Archer, listen, do not talk to anyone else tonight. Don't answer unknown numbers. Don't go back to the airport alone. Archer stared at Astrid while Rachel spoke. He watched the prosecutor and his wife trying to calculate routes, and he watched the woman beneath it realizing there were none left. I understand, he told Rachel, and ended the call. Astrid's face tightened. They'll come for me, she said. Yes, Archer replied. And for you, she added, as if that was the part that still mattered most. Archer's gaze didn't soften. They already did, he said. They did it with a caption and a crop. They did it with my own words, printed like evidence. Astrid's breath shook. If I cooperate, she said, voice low, I can tell them who Brian is. I can. Archer held up a hand, not to silence her, but to stop the illusion that cooperation could rewind time. Do it, he said. Tell the truth. Save what you can of your soul. Astrid flinched at the word soul. Then she nodded, one clean motion, like signing something she had avoided reading. Archer reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the wedding ring. He didn't remember retrieving it from the airport table. He only knew it had been in his pocket since then, warm from his skin, like a lie he couldn't throw away until the right moment. He placed it on the hotel table beneath the gold-lettered logo on the water bottle. Archer, so the name and the symbol sat together in the same frame, finally honest about what they were, branding and vow, both made to persuade. Astrid stared at the ring as if it were a verdict. Ottilie looked away, sobbing softly now, unable to watch the end of what she had helped dismantle. Archer stepped back. He didn't hate Astrid in that moment. Hate would have meant she still owned space inside him. What he felt was smaller and more final. The acceptance that love could be real and still not be safe. He turned toward the door. Behind him, Astrid whispered his name, one time, stripped of all her titles. It sounded like the first and last honest thing she had said all night. Archer did not answer. He opened the suite door and walked into the corridor, the carpet swallowing his footsteps the way snow swallowed tracks outside. Quietly, completely, as if the world had always been ready to erase him. But this time, he was the one choosing what remained.